He is risen. It's great to be together on an Easter Sunday morning to worship. I love the tradition of flowering the cross. Didn't grow up doing that, but I wouldn't give it up for anything now. It's dogma. It has to be done. I hope you're having a wonderful Easter time. I know for many of us, it's a chance perhaps to get together with family, to see some friends. It's always great to see some faces that I haven't seen in a while. Sometimes folks from here go visit. Sometimes others come to visit here, and that's always good. We like to see you. Last week, I was talking about how to understand the cross and the grand misunderstanding of the cross that some of us, unfortunately, have. If you were raised Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox, this is completely foreign to you. You're thinking, why would anyone think of the cross that way? Because unfortunately, it is kind of a Reformation idea. But what I hopefully dispelled was any notion that our God demands human sacrifice, that somehow he delights in the death of Jesus so that he can make the world right. And I think that's a terrible misunderstanding. God does not have to kill someone to forgive anyone. God is not a God of blood and death, of darkness, of demanding people die. No, he is a God of life. He is a God of love. He is a God of making right that which has been made wrong. And so in the cross, as we talked about last week, we celebrate how God, through Christ, loves us without end. Jesus talked about loving his enemies, and he just didn't talk about it, he did it. Because on Good Friday, he loves his enemies even to the point of suffering death at their hands, and he forgives them. As he knows, as he prays, Father, forgive them, he knows his Father will, because he knows the heart of his Father is the heart of forgiveness and of love, even of those who commit violence. And so in many ways, the cross is human violence taken out upon God, and God completely undermining and dispelling the notion of violence having any good at all. God responds to our violence, because after all, it was people saying, crucify him. It wasn't God. God responds to our violence with nonviolence, with love and forgiveness, making an end to all violence, hatred, evil, overcoming sin and death. And so that's what we rightly celebrate when we think about the cross. So what is it that we are thinking about today as we celebrate the empty tomb? Well, the empty tomb is in some ways a way of looking back at the cross and making sure that we understand it. Because if you think about it, the symbol of Christianity throughout all the centuries is a cross. People don't go around wearing a pendant of an empty tomb, right? The empty tomb is not like kind of replacing the cross in our imagination of what's important. The empty tomb is telling us that the true meaning of the cross is something to be celebrated and something to be taken for ourselves. To, yes, wear, to display, to say this symbolizes what we're about. We are people of the cross because the cross is a symbol of love without end, without limit. And the empty tomb is God saying, with my son and his demonstration of love, as I wanted him to demonstrate it, I am well pleased. It's kind of a nonverbal form of what is said at his baptism. This is my beloved son. In him I am well pleased. And so the resurrection should leave no doubt in our minds that God says, yes, the selflessness of Jesus, his caring about others more than his own life, that is the true testimony of who I am. He has shown accurately and truly who I am. We have seen in Christ the Father and his ways. So that is what is affirmed by the empty tomb, that sin and death have been conquered, Satan and the grave are now powerless. In the thing I sent out on Friday, the little preview that I know some people like to read the scriptures ahead of time and think about it, I said that the empty tomb is both an exclamation mark and a question mark. It's an exclamation mark in the sense that God is saying, yes, this is what I want to demonstrate in the world. That I love and do not hate, that I forgive and do not hold a grudge, that I do not respond in violence to violence, but instead I forgive. The empty tomb is that exclamation point. It declares for us, yes, sin and death have been conquered, the tomb is empty, and God has raised the one who was faithful in love, signifying that this is the way forward, always, that we are to take up our cross and to live in like manner to Jesus, that the cross represents to us how we navigate life, disappointments, hurts. We try and take it as the cross to us, a way of finding the path of Christ. So it's an exclamation point. But it is also a question mark. It poses a question to us. The question I really want us to think more about this morning is, so what exactly does it mean for us to look at the empty tomb? What does it mean practically? I mean, it's one thing to say, yes, the tomb's empty, to say he is risen, and to respond, he is risen indeed, and to proclaim that as a truth. But I think there's a sense in which truth only becomes real when it is lived. And we only truly believe, as much as we do. Now, I don't want you to hear that wrong, because you can hear that in a kind of tone that makes it sound like, and you'd better get busy. Like, oh, the last thing I need is more things to do. Like, oh, so you're just laying a bigger burden on me, and now I have to worry that I'm not doing enough. That's not the sense in which I mean it. I don't mean this morning to talk about, well, there's a long list of other things you need to be doing if you want to be godly, if you want to honor the empty tomb. But there is a truth to the understanding that I only truly believe as much as I do, that a belief that does not result in some sort of way of living that's now different is merely a matter in my head and not a matter of my life. And so while we think about it, I'm not suggesting there's more we need to do. I'm suggesting perhaps there's a different way we need to do what it is we are doing. In other words, perhaps the empty tomb as an exclamation point to the cross is not saying, so here's a long list of other things to incorporate, as much as it's saying this is a different way, perhaps a new beginning of how I live my life as I've been living it, but now in a new register, in a new way, with kind of a new divine melody to the song of my life. What does it mean practically? One way to think about this question is to ask ourselves, so why did our gospel writers write their gospels and include the story of the passion and the resurrection? I mean, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, why were they writing these accounts? Sometimes, in particularly recent history, we've seen these as arguments trying to prove something, as if the gospel writers were trying to make a case and prove a fact. But if you think about it, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were not writing little booklets to be handed out to unbelievers that if they read them, perhaps they will come to belief. They were writing these accounts of Jesus to Christians, to their churches, not trying to convince people to come to belief, but writing to people who did believe to give them a kind of shape and impetus to the faith that they held. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John were writing to Christians, to their churches. Luke makes it very explicit. He he addresses his gospel and Acts, his second volume, to Theophilus, which literally means lover of God. Is that a real person's name, or is he kind of using that as a figure? Like, whoever is a lover of God, this is my account of Jesus to you. I think John's pretty explicit when he begins his gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He's not writing to people who doubt that. He's writing to people who already understand that, and he's trying to talk to them about the depth of this meaning. So our gospel writers did not write an account of the resurrection to prove it to anyone. I think they write the account of the resurrection to inspire us, and that's different. I think we as Christians, as believers, need to be inspired by the resurrection, to see it as telling a story that then becomes the story of all life and of creation and of history itself. That everything is to be seen through the person of Christ and through his own story is the story of God's work in the world and can become our story. That the resurrection is not something to be proved, but it is something to be experienced. And things that are unprovable can still be experienced. If someone were to ask me, prove to me that Jesus was raised from the dead, I would say, I don't think I can. I'm not even going to attempt that. What kind of evidence could I give to actually be overwhelmingly convincing to you? But you can experience it. You can experience the risen Lord. And I think that's why Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote these accounts to their churches to help Christians experience what this can mean for them. The question is, what does it mean practically? How am I supposed to live differently in light of the resurrection, of the empty tomb? Well, there are several things that I think it communicates to us. There is now, in light of the resurrection, the way in which we can live beyond fear. In Hebrews chapter 2, verses 14 and 15, the Hebrew writer says that we are being held, humanity is held by the devil under the power of the fear of death. And I think that's a very good observation about human psychology. That in the backs of our minds, especially the older we get, we become very aware of our mortality. Sometimes when we're young, we're completely oblivious to the fact that we're mortal. But the older you get, the more obvious it becomes, I am not immortal. And it is, I think, very much a true statement that to be human is to come to be aware of our fragility, of our finiteness, of our weakness, of our limitations. And ultimately, all of that can be summed up in terms of death. Not just the physical death of our body, but sometimes the death of your dreams, the death of your hopes, the death of certain things you attempted and did not succeed at. There's a lot of dying and loss. There's a lot of things that we grieve in life. And sometimes we can live in such fear of our limitations, of the possibility that things won't work out. In fact, sometimes the likelihood that things aren't going to work out, at least not like I wanted them to. And there can be a kind of paralyzing fear, a kind of always living with the sense of doom, of disaster, of something's going to go wrong. Basically, to be a little neurotic, right? Always fearing the other shoe's going to drop. If things are good, it's just a sign that, things are going to go bad. Some of us have that somewhat of a disposition like that, a kind of personality where we're always anticipating the worst. Some of us are very optimistic and we're always hoping for the best, but we still experience that things don't always go our way. That's a kind of death. It's a kind of limitation. It comes out of a fear that we realize we are powerless. We are not able to do what it is we would like to do. We fall short. So what does the empty tomb mean? The empty tomb is a declaration that death is no more. Those limitations, though experienced, though we may encounter them, they are not the final word on our lives. It's so disappointing to meet someone whose great ambitions that maybe they had in life have not worked out, and they seem to be in a kind of malaise, a kind of hopelessness that their dreams did not come about. And they live perhaps with some despair, a lack of hope. The empty tomb is saying, no matter what is happening now, no matter how negative it may be, that is not the end. There's nothing that looks darker than Good Friday when Jesus is dying on the cross. But that's the whole point of the Passion narrative, that when things seem the bleakest and the most hopeless, just around the corner is God's work of redemption, God's work of bringing life out of death, God's work of healing that which seems like it's unhealable, broken permanently. So when we think about the empty tomb, we're thinking about freedom. Freedom from our fears, freedom from even the realistic limitations we know we have. We may know we're limited and finite and fragile and weak, but I can be free from the fear that somehow that will define me. For those of us who may feel guilty, more guilty than others, and again, I know there's some people, I'm not one of those people who feels incredibly guilty. I tend to feel self-justified all the time. Like I was right. I mean, I know I'm not. And I know I make all the same mistakes anyone else does, but I don't tend to walk around with a bunch of guilt. But I know there's some other people, your kind of personal makeup is you feel deeply all your mistakes and they just haunt you. And if that's where you are, then the empty tomb is saying, no, sin and death are overcome. Your own failures mean nothing in the long term. And before God, they are nothing. And he's bringing life out of your experience of death. And so your disappointments may be yours alone, but I think God's delighted with you. He really is. God's disposition towards his children is pure delight and joy. Each one of us, no matter what we've done, no matter where we are in life, no matter what the history has been, he loves us dearly, even as his own son, Jesus. And there's no way that we ever lose that love. So the empty tomb, as a question mark, asks me, will I live into the kind of freedom, the kind of fearlessness, the kind of hope that it represents? I mean, if it's real to me, not again that I can prove it's factual reality to myself or to anyone else, but if what it symbolizes, if what it means when we read these scriptures, when we read these stories, if what it's supposed to inspire us to do and to be, to live with this kind of hope beyond what we can see and what we experience that is so limited, if it's going to be real to me, then two things. One is, I think I see the possibility of participation with what God is doing. And that's hopeful. That the work of God in the world, from the very beginning until now, and fully revealed in the person of Jesus, is a work that's bringing life and goodness and fullness. And I get to participate in that. No matter how broken and how much of a failure I see myself to be, no matter how much I feel like I made the wrong choices and now I'm stuck with the road I'm on. The possibility for participation with a God who is making all things new. I'm quoting Revelation, right? Behold, I make all things new. right? I sneak little quotes in like that. I get to participate with that God in the making of all things new. That's what the empty tomb is telling me. And it's giving me, again, not a list of things I need to do that I feel more burdened and feel more, harried about, oh, I've got to remember to do this. It's just a different way of living. It's a different way of getting up each morning. It's a different way of going about my ordinary activities with a kind of openness to how I can participate with God in my daily activities, in what I do. That God is present, that I am present with him and he is present with me, that his life is now my life, that I'm participating in something glorious and divine that is both the cross with the exclamation point of the empty tomb. But the other thing I think about, besides participation, is the freedom to risk. Sometimes when I become too, perhaps, restrained by my awareness of my own limitations, I become afraid to risk. Let's just play it very safe. Let's not take any chances because after all, I know myself to be someone who can screw things up. So maybe I don't need to risk. My good friend, Aaron Simmons, the philosopher at Furman, he likes to define faith as risk with intention. I like that definition. For him, faith is risk with intention. It's not risk without any intention. It's not foolish risk, but it's risk with an intention. And his question that he puts to those who dialogue with him is, so what will be your intention and will you risk for it? There's a kind of carpe diem sort of sense to that, seize the day. The empty tomb, I think, says risk it. And risk it on things like love. Risk it on things like forgiveness. Risk it on things like blessing those who curse you. Just go ahead and take the risk because the tomb's empty. The end is good. The exclamation point tells us that the risk that Jesus took to make himself vulnerable to those who wanted to kill him and to let them do it was a risk worth taking. Because in the end, he triumphs. The love is powerful, more powerful than death. The love he shows is the way to life. Jesus calls us to die to ourselves, and in many ways, in doing that, we embrace the risen Christ. It is myself who often stands in my own way. To love my enemies is sometimes to realize that I am my worst enemy and I must love myself anyway. I stand in my own way, not Christ, not God. Perhaps my fear of limitation, my fear of the mistakes I might make, my unwillingness to risk stands in the way of experiencing the fullness of what God is doing in my life. But Jesus says, die to yourself, Greg. Just die to yourself. And what would that mean? That would mean freedom. That would mean participation in the life of God. That would mean the opportunity to take a risk with the intention of something far beyond what I could possibly do, and yet see that happen through the power of God. So maybe this Easter morning, we can be inspired by the story of the empty tomb. Inspired to live it in a particular way. Let it shape who we are, how we do the ordinary things, how we do, in fact, some extraordinary things. Things that puzzle other people. Why would they do that? Well, because I think the tomb's empty. And that encourages me to sometimes do, what Paul might call foolish things. But they're the foolishness of God. And that's always the right thing to do.